show, taking your business from seed to sapling to towering giant, with your hosts, best-selling author and business growth experts Noah Fleming and Sean Veltman. This is the only show that gives you proven, pragmatic, and immediately applicable business growth strategies every week in 15 minutes or less. Here's Noah and Sean.
Okay, we're back for another episode of this wonderful, awesome podcast. This is your host, Noah Fleming, with my co-host, Mr. Sean Veltman. Sean, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic, Noah. Can't wait for this week's topic. I say that every time because every time it's fantastic, and I love these discussions.
So this is a really interesting one for our listeners out there. Today we are going to talk about the concept of micromanagement, the idea of micromanagement, which often gets a lot of flack, and sometimes that flack is warranted because quite often micromanagement is, to me, so blatantly wrong it can damage people. But we want to take a little bit of a different tack today, I think, Sean. We want to talk about when the term micromanagement does make sense, when it's needed. And you know what? Maybe I'm using the wrong term. Maybe I should let you say what the proper terminology is.
Well, and I think that's a great point, Noah. We often conflate different things when we use the overarching term micromanagement. And I think, when we all get uncomfortable with it, we're thinking about telling people how to do something. Rather than telling them what to do and being very clear what we expect. And, often we hear that and it's almost cliche, right? Tell people what to do and let them figure out how to do it. And we think of that as this broad, high-level management structure. But really, telling somebody what to do can be very specific. I can go out and tell somebody, hey, go close 10 accounts. Or I can tell them, make 20 calls every day to new prospects. Those are both telling them what to do, not telling them how to do it. But somehow and often, people think of that latter one as micromanagement. And so I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes from is there a level where you're telling somebody to do a task that's so granular that it's no longer valuable telling them to do it?
Well, I have a few thoughts on that. And I mean, a big part of this podcast is we like to share things because we're in there in the trenches, working with companies, working with organizations. We've both been doing this for a long time. So we've seen a lot of these different things. And, I've seen both sides of the coin. I've seen the CEO or the president that stands over them and watches what they do and gives them no autonomy to do what they need to do. And so there's a heavy hand coming down all the time. And then if they do something that, is out of line with that president or that CEO or whoever, he smacks them as if they should know what to do. And so I remember very clearly in one client where they said, he expects us to know, but we don't know what he expects. He expects us to know how to do things, but we have no idea what he expects. And so there was this heavy level of micromanagement there, and where they were really lacking, which just alluded to, is this idea of management, right? And so I think that's such an important point. I just think sometimes there's a time and a place for the management side, and sometimes the micromanagement is just way over the top.
Well, I agree, Noah, and I think a lot of this does come down to that distinction of how versus what. And so, your comment there was perfect, right? He expects us to know what to do. He expects us to know how to do it. He expects us to do it the way he would do it every time without having clear guidelines.
Yeah, we don't know what he expects, but he just expects it.
Yeah, I'm reminded there of the great Gallup organization books, First Break All the Rules in 12, where they say that the number one problem with management and people being managed is they don't know what's expected of them. I think that's a great example of it. But back to the idea of the micromanagement, I think people get unreasonably afraid, and they get afraid of being accused of micromanagement. I was talking to a sales manager who worked for some of the largest companies in the world recently. And, he was telling me, Sean, there's no way that I would do a lot of the things that that I know I should in my team, because they'd crucify me. They'd say I was trying to micromanage them. He literally said to me, Sean, I couldn't tell my team that I expect them to put a certain number of notes a day into the CRM. He said, because they would accuse me of micromanaging. And to me, that was crazy. And I told him so.
Well, I think we see this all the time, right? And sorry to interrupt you, but we see this idea of, well, I can't start doing what you're suggesting now because we've never done it that way. We haven't done it in the past 20 years. They're going to think we're micromanaging. We can't ask them to update us on their sales activity because that's micromanagement. And again, I think the big point here is, no, that's management, right? That's
exactly.
That's the duty of the manager, the sales manager, leadership in the organization. And so I think it's so important to be crystal clear about what those activities are, what those expectations are. And so we don't have people running around saying, he's whacking me on the head every time I do something because he says I'm doing it wrong, but I have no idea what he wants me to do.
Yeah. And, I think one of the things that both you and I have done quite a bit is addressed this in many companies by saying to people, look, there may be better ways to do it than the current process. But if you're not following the current process, we'll never know how well it works. So here's the deal. You do it exactly as the process says for the first 3 months. And then after that, let's start experimenting with ways that you think it should be changed. And by all means, if you get better results than everybody else, we'll change the process to reflect the way that you're doing it.
So it reminds me a lot of our, my pick 3 process, which you've helped me refine and develop into an application. And we've, this process has been rolled out in so many companies with such dramatic success, but we instantly get pushback of, how can I be expected to do these tasks every day? What do you expect? And so you have people that want to do it differently, but then, like you said, we stick with it for 3 months. We expect the rules to be followed. We make the expectations. Now we have this data to go back and look at and say, well, here's why John did so much better than you, because he followed the rules. He did what was expected for 3 times a day, whereas you did it, 6 times over the course of 60 days. And so it's just, it's so interesting to me and such a fascinating topic.
I agree. I think, and this, this has the potential to drag us down another rabbit hole, which will be another podcast around the importance of processes, whether it's sales processes or surgical checklists or any other number of instances where we can create the step-by-step process and the expected actions at each place. But for this podcast on micromanaging, I think what I really just want to make sure I leave everybody with is the idea that you don't need to be afraid of micromanagement, right? If you can justify what you're doing, if there's a reason for what you're asking, then it's not micromanagement, it's management. Even if what you're asking for is, you need to do a certain number of calls per day, or you need to use this language because it's our corporate language and I'm going to watch you like a hawk. There's a potential there for that to be called micromanagement, but those things are incredibly important. And until it's proven that there's a better way to do it, I'd say, people have to follow it.
So again, so much of our work we do, which you said, we want to avoid the rabbit hole, has to do with process and tracking the inputs and making sure people are doing what they're doing. So again, I think of this very simple distinction, which is, right, a manager can stand over somebody and listen to every call they make, read every email they send. And then if the manager or that person comes back to them and says, you're stupid, you're not doing it the right way, right? That's the worst way to do it, versus saying, look, I listened to one of your phone calls today. Let's have a role play or a discussion on how we might do this better. Or, I've seen through our tracking and through our data inputs that you seem to be emailing more than you're picking up the phone. Let's have a discussion about how we can improve in that area. And that's, again, just getting that information so we can manage and we can actively manage instead of simply micromanaging and beating our people over the heads.
Exactly. You and I often talk about data-driven management. We talk about managing by objective facts rather than HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion. And, I think those were just great examples you gave there of being able to use objective data in a way that's constructive for the people you're managing, rather than just telling them you're doing it wrong or giving them no explanation for why they need to do what you're telling them to do.
So, Mr. Veltman, I have a thought here. I think we should leave everybody with a challenge again. I would like to suggest something along the lines of looking at an area of their business where there should be more active management, where there should be more active concern about what's happening on a daily basis. How would you add to that challenge?
I think that's a great one. The flip side of that is, if you're concerned about micromanaging somewhere, or if you've been accused of micromanaging something, then just ask yourself the question, is there a reason for my ask here that has a direct impact on what they're going to do in the future to be successful? And if you can honestly answer that question, yes, what I'm doing will directly impact them and help them be successful, then don't worry what anybody calls it. That's management.
I think you nailed on something else which we haven't discussed here. But when there are proper business outcomes and or objectives to some decision, to some effort, then, like you said, manage all you want, do it however you like, bring down that that overarching shadow over the person, because that's management. As long as you've got those objectives and those outcomes in mind.
Exactly. And as usual, everybody, we'd love to hear from you. We want to hear how you're using these challenges, if you're using them, and when you do, like just about everybody else that gets in touch, we're pretty sure that you will find these are incredibly impactful and can have a huge impact even with very small changes.
So thank you, Sean. And there you have it. We're under 12 minutes today, my friend. Not bad. 12 minutes for a really impactful, valuable, pragmatic lesson that I think any one of our listeners can take back to their organizations today and instantly start looking around and finding areas of improvement. As Sean mentioned, you're welcome to get in touch with us. Best way to do that is from my website, which is noahfleming.com. As always, we like to ask you if you're willing to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you heard the podcast, but we hope you enjoyed it. And as Sean said, feel free to get in touch. Sean, anything else to leave our listeners with today on this fantastic, wonderful, beautiful day, hopefully wherever you are?
I think that's a fantastic way to leave it, Noah. I can't wait to talk to you again next week.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to join us each and every week for another great episode of The Evergreen Show with your hosts, Noah Fleming and Sean Veltman. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time on The Evergreen Show.